I'd like to introduce Jeff Rogers. He's the lead accessibility strategist at Accessiblue. He's been an instructional designer and an accessibility specialist for 20 years in higher education and is a certified Quality Matters reviewer for higher education and K-12 courses. Today, he's here to demystify WCAG and teach us about some user-friendly tools and techniques to measure compliance with WCAG. Welcome, Jeff.
Welcome. Thank you. Can everyone hear okay? Yes. Thank you. So great. Thank you for inviting me. It's great to be here. I've been monitoring and checking into these sessions throughout the day. So it's been a great resource. It's a great conference. So there's a lot of good information coming out. So very excited. As a mentioned, my name is Jeff Rogers. I work for a company called Accessiblue. Prior to that, I spent 20 years in higher ed, where I was a professor, instructional designer, and then ended up my last few years as just doing accessibility specifically. And I've been with Accessiblue for about 3 years now. And it's been an interesting change. So we went from checking accessibility and working in higher ed to now hopefully we're working to make the web and the companies that we work for more accessible. So one of the things that I always was confused on early on in my higher ed days was how to really check for accessibility. So we say a lot of things, especially with Quality Matters, if there's any reviewers out there, how do you really check for accessibility? What tools are out there? It sounds like you have Ally for your LMS, which is a nice tool. I've worked with that for many years, and I was actually one of the first developers who was working with Blackboard who had that. So we were onboarding with that. So it's a great tool. But besides that, what else can you do? Especially if you have third-party publisher content, how can you check for that? So that's really what this is about. So do we have the presentation, right? We can show that. Is it something that somebody's showing there, or do I need to do it here on this end? Oh, there it goes. It's starting to go. All right, go to the next slide, please. It's just our little placeholder. Right. So yeah, this session is on streamlining WCAG testing and tools and tips for non-coders. So I am not a web developer by trade, but it is something that we kind of have to learn a little bit about in order to do some testing. But there's some easy ways to go about doing some testing and figuring out how to check for accessibility without having to learn all the code. And so go ahead to the, actually, this is a good slide to have. So on it are a few images. So in the upper left-hand corner of the slide is the Love Accessibility logo, which is ALLY or A11Y, which stands for the 11 letters of accessibility, and then the Y. So that's in a blue heart. And then in the bottom right-hand corner is a cartoon avatar of me. So it's always my indication for me to describe myself. So I am a white male with brown hair. Sometimes it's kind of crazy, like it is in the avatar. And then I do have glasses and a beard that is a little bit more white and gray than I wish it was. But that is the cartoon version of me, and it kind of pops up every once in a while throughout the presentation. So please go ahead and advance the slide. Just a quick overview. I think this is pretty well known right now, but we're definitely going to have some time for questions. I do have the Q&A open on this end, so hopefully I can check for some questions if you have them along the way and try to address that. And the main session or the focus on this is really just general accessibility testing. And so if you are a coder, if you are a web developer, I will apologize in advance because you might hear some things you're just going, oh my gosh. But again, this is for non-coders, so we won't be going into as much detail. Next, please. So learning objectives. So yes, I spent time as an instructional designer. I always like to have learning objectives And basically the three for this session is I want to make sure that you can, identify and prioritize some WCAG criteria specifically for education, and then use some of the tools we'll talk about that are pretty user-friendly, and then just be able to apply some of these tips and strategies to help improve the efficiency and effectiveness of your classes. Next, please. So one question I have before we get really into this is, how does a website fail an accessibility evaluation? And this is sort of a rhetorical question in the sense of just wanting to get you to think about, what is this pass or fail? And is there a pass or fail? If you are familiar with Quality Matters, maybe you know the 85% rule. However, letting you know the W3C, which is the people who create and control WCAG criteria, they don't have an assessment rubric. And so it's rather kind of interesting. So if you have any thoughts, feel free to share them in the chat or the Q&A. But it's one question that we usually get a lot is, how long does it take, or how long should it take, as well as how does something pass or fail? So a lot of times people think that if you have one failure, that's it, you're all done. But the way that WCAG is broken down is that it's just a whole bunch of different criteria, and each one has its own individual meaning. And even though something may not necessarily pass or fully support one criteria, it may still support a lot of others. But ultimately, the ultimate test of whether something is accessible or not is whether or not your students can use it. So that's just like the main thing. So now as we get into the 411 of WCAG testing, let's first talk about what WCAG is. So we probably hear that a lot, but it stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And they are a set of criteria that the W3C has put out that helps showcase and define what it means to be accessible. And so as of October 5th, we are now on WCAG 2.2. So that just came out, which in the accessibility world is like this huge, great thing. We've been waiting for this for like 2 years now. And so finally it's out. So WCAG 2.2. They've updated and added some criteria and took away one. But with WCAG criteria, how it's divided up is into 3 different levels of accessibility. First is A, or single A. Next is double A, and then triple A. Now, all 3 are acceptable levels of accessibility, and they build upon each other. So with double A being considered the level that is most associated with a good level of accessibility. Doesn't mean that A is bad, it just means that double A builds upon that. And then with AAA has some criteria that most websites don't really have. So again, if you're going to have like live video, or if you're going to have any kind of I'm get a loss for words here. But any kind of sign language. So if you're going to have like American Sign Language and live, or any kind of sign language on there, that falls into a AAA category. But if you don't have it, then it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It's just in that particular area. So the AAA is really just sort of above and beyond kind of criteria. But all of these 4 principles then are divided into 4 principles, which are called perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. So most of those are pretty self-explanatory, but the robust really refers to how a web page behaves on a device. So if you turn it from landscape to portrait, does it change the way it's supposed to? If you zoom in on the screen using your fingers, does it actually zoom in and stay that way? Do you have the ability to scroll through it if you do zoom? So those kinds of things are what they mean by robust. Next, please. So a couple of need to knows as we go through this. So the first need to know is that websites are built with 3 types of code. So I mentioned this is for no coders or non-coders. And what we're going to talk about here is essentially everything that you need as a non-coder to know how to understand a little bit about how websites are built. So I likened it to how you would build a house. So the first type of code is HTML, or hypertext markup language. That's the one most people think of. And it's essentially the building block of the website. So using the image of the house that's on the screen here, the HTML would be similar to the wood, the metal, the bricks that are used to frame the house. So HTML is that basic structure of a website. And HTML code does have tags for specific elements like buttons and links and paragraphs. And accessible websites tend to use these, what we call semantic elements. And websites that are less accessible tend to use real generic ones, and they don't really define what these buttons and links are. So we have a link that sometimes looks like a button, or a button that behaves like a link, and it's very confusing for users of assistive technology. So having proper use of HTML is nice, but that's really what it is. So it makes essentially the frame of the door, it makes the frame of the garage, it makes the frame of the windows. And when we add the second type of code, that's what we call cascading style sheets, or CSS, and that's the visual elements, the visual code. So that would be like the paint, the decorations. If you want to have a door, make it a brown door and have some windows panes in it. If you want to have 3 windows, if you want to have drapes, all that would sort of be done with the CSS. And the third one is what we call JavaScript, and that makes everything move or function. So if you're going to have plumbing, if you're going to have doors that open, if the garage door goes up and down on a website, that is all controlled with JavaScript. And so those are how the 3 different types of code work with a website. Next, please. All right, so the next need to know is how assistive technology interacts with all this code. Well, what assistive technology interacts with is called the web browser's DOM, or the DOM, and that stands for Document Object Model. That's a fancy word for saying that's what a web browser displays. So when you click on a link, when you open up a web page, what a light-dependent person or a sighted person, I always like to refer to it as light-dependent. You're either light-dependent or you're not. So if you're a light-dependent person, you'll see all these different things on the website. And that's what that web browser displays. Each web browser is different. So if you're using Chrome versus Edge versus Safari versus Firefox, each one can interpret all those 3 types of code slightly differently. So it's possible that each web browser might display a web page individually a little bit differently. And then the assistive technology then might have slightly different interactions with each one. So you can have a different experience in a different environment. So an environment, say on Windows with JAWS, might behave and have a slight difference than if you were on a Mac using VoiceOver. It's just something to need to know. So if you were going to be checking some things, what we usually recommend is trying to check different environments. So if you have the ability to check on something on a mobile device versus your desktop, that's great, because then you can kind of see those different experiences. The last part of this need to know is that you can view any of these 3 types of code if you want to, just by going to the inspect view of a web browser, which typically is just by right-clicking on an empty area on the page and then choosing inspect, and that will open up that the code. So if you want to see the code, look what's under the hood, that's how you can do it. Next, please. All right, so the next part is 10 checks that you should make. So the WCAG criteria has almost 100 different individual criteria and best practices along with it. But that's obviously very confusing for many people, especially if you're not an accessibility expert. So what we've kind of done here is taking those criteria and come up with 10 of the criteria, or the 10 of the most essential criteria that would be critical for you to check for students. Next, please. So all of these 10 are available in a companion document that I have provided. So don't worry about trying to write these down quickly. They are available not only just in the PowerPoint version here, but also there's a link in the PowerPoint to that Google slide, or the Google link in the Google Docs version of that particular document, but I think it's also available as a resource here as well. So all 10 of these are available to you. They do have more information on that document. So again, don't feel like you have to hurry up and scramble and write things down. All this is available for you. And so the first of these key accessibility checks that we want to do is check to make sure there's text alternatives. So all of the images, graphs, and charts have correct alt text. And we just heard in the last presentation, they talked about this some too. The important aspect is correct alt text. So if you are going to be checking this for your particular course or subject matter, as the subject matter expert, you would want to make sure that there's correct, not just grammar and punctuation, but they're using the correct context and purpose is being conveyed through the alt text. So one of the important things that I like to point out is that assistive technology and users of assistive technology really like it when there's correct grammar, usage, and punctuation. And when you put that in your alt text, most screen readers and other assistive technology will respond to that. So it helps make it more easy to understand and digestible for your students if you actually have periods in your alt text. Because a lot of times what we'll see is just basically this giant run-on sentence of a description, and that can be very difficult for users to understand when it's reading and it goes directly from a paragraph to the description of the image and then to the next paragraph. It's hard to understand that there's actually an image in there. The next up, number 2, is headings and structure, making sure that the heading tags or H tags that we'll see follow a clear and logical structure. I always just say make it work like an outline. So you have one heading level 1, which is sort of the title or the main topic, and then you have all these H2s, H3s, 4s, and 5s that basically divide all the content in the web page or in a document up, so it's easy to navigate. Users of assistive technology can actually jump through and find things really quickly if it's organized well. And so they can actually jump from heading to heading to help find information. Number 3, keyboard accessibility, making sure that the keyboard can be used for all these different functions and interactive elements. So if you have a button, could you activate the button with the enter key or the space bar? That's pretty important because that's how it should be done with assistive technology. So if you actually go and maybe hover over something and it automatically changes and selects something, that's not good, because you don't want that to happen and a user to be taken somewhere else or to activate something on a page that they can't turn off. Number 4 would be focus indicators. So focus indicators are like a visual outline or a visual indicator on elements and buttons and form fields. So when you're using a keyboard to navigate through a website and just tabbing through or using the tab key or arrow key to go through a particular website or application, you should see a visual indicator go through it and that'll tell you where you are at. And that's very helpful, especially if you have people with different cognitive abilities, or if you have people who have various levels of visual impairment and they might need to have that. And especially if you have users where English maybe isn't their native language, it's very helpful for them to be able to understand where they are when you're selecting on something or you're going across the screen. Next, please. So continuing on, so our key accessibility checks, number 5 would be color contrast. So just making sure there's sufficient contrast between the text and the background. And the rule that we like to follow with WCAG is basically 4.5 to 1. And so something that has a contrast between the font color being, say, like a black or a dark color, and then the background being white or light, that's the best you can get. And so if it's close to that, that's really good. Next, audio and video captions. So I think I talked a little bit about this earlier too. I know somebody was talking about that in one of the sessions about making sure that there's a difference between describing background sounds as well as just having a transcript of the spoken word. So all of that can be very critical to students. So making sure that at least there's captions on videos, and if you are going to have like a podcast or a lecture, having a text version available, again, is very important for a variety of different reasons. Number 7, responsive design. So this, again, is that robust aspect by making sure that materials and websites will work well on different screen sizes and device, because you will have a lot of students that will use different devices. I worked at a community college setting in Cleveland, and we actually had entire classes in these large numbers of students who are accessing and doing their entire course on their phone. They didn't have a computer. They didn't necessarily have full-time access to a computer. And so they were accessing a lot of their information on their cell phone, their mobile device. And so being able to just, check something really quickly to see how it's going to behave or look on that can be very important. Number 8, forms and interactive elements, making sure that forms, buttons, any kind of links, anything that somebody would interact with is going to have clear instructions, identify itself. And if it's a form, or especially if you're going to be submitting an assignment, if you try to submit the assignment and you put in incorrect information, like instead of an email, maybe you just put in numbers, does it give you an error message? Does it tell you that you submitted something incorrectly and allow you to resubmit it? You'd be surprised on how many times I've worked with instructors who have never actually tried to submit homework. They have no idea how to submit an assignment on their online course. And so when they go and try to do it, they understand the difficulty on it. And especially with some publisher materials, sometimes we've discovered that they don't always give an error message. So a student doesn't know whether or not they submitted something correctly. And so that can be very critical to understand that as aspects. Go ahead, next slide or next page, please. So the last two then is language and readability. Making sure that there's plain language, avoiding jargon, or at least describing it if you have any kind of acronym, making sure the content's organized on the page. And then there's also number 10, consistent navigation, making sure that the course and all your documents have the ability to be consistent throughout. Being able to be predictable in its navigation, that's really good. One of the things that sometimes instructors are surprised to find out is that when you have a student who has 3, 4, 5 different classes, I'm not sure if ASU is this way, but a lot of the institutions I worked at had academic freedom where the instructors could change how their course looked. They could control everything within the LMS for their course. So you had students whose every course was organized differently. And so that can be very confusing for students when your tests are located in an assessment folder, and in another class it's in a tests folder, or in their third class it's in this week's to do. So having something that, if you can make it as easy as possible for your course, that can be very helpful for students, and that it's very consistent, maybe having multiple ways to get to certain assignments and things. And I saw there was a question in a Q&A. As an ID, I never know whether to put image of in the beginning of alt text. I've heard conflicting answers. Can I clarify, and should it be added to each alt text for images? Yes, I will clarify that. So assistive technology, if you use a screen reader, when it hits an image, or if it's can determine that it's either marked as an image correctly within a website, or if it's like a JPEG, an image file, assistive technology will automatically announce image of or image. So you don't need to put that in your alt text, because the user should understand that context from the assistive technology. So you don't need to put that in there because it's kind of redundant at that point. The only times I would put anything in there, and what we recommend, is if it's like a logo. I know some tools will flag that as being a possible issue, but really it helps out. So if you have logo, or Nike logo, or ASU logo, and then you describe the logo, that helps them understand the difference if you were to just have something that just said ASU or Arizona State University that was alt text for an image, because then they would be able to understand the difference between a logo of it versus maybe just a link that has that in it. So there's another question in there from Carissa. Had someone recently asked how to make screencasts available for low vision, no vision students. Your response was how to make sure to use a script with the scriptive language. That was good. And to give a play-by-play, talking aloud, that's good. As well as include closed captions and possibly even screenshots, images of the most important parts of the screencast. All that is good. Is that accurate, or should you give more information to this instructor? I think that's really good. I think that is really accurate, because if they're calling out the important aspects and what all users need to gain from that, I think that's really the most important thing. So I think you're spot on with that. That's some good advice. Thank you. You're welcome. All right. Next slide, please. So I'm just trying to be watching some time and everything. So next up is some user-friendly testing tools. So there's the Jeff avatar with 2 thumbs up. And so I'm going to talk really quickly about some of my easy-to-use tools, the ones that we like to go to the most. So next slide, please. Quick drink. I know I'm talking fast, so hopefully everyone can keep up, but there's lots of information and I want to make sure we cover some of it and have time for questions. So there's 3 different kinds of testing tools I'm going to talk about and show. And just really quickly, the 3 different types are basically automated tools, manual testing tools, and assistive technology. So the automated tools, those are ones that will automatically go through and scan and check and provide some feedback for you, such as like Wave, Google Lighthouse are good. One of the things I want to point out is overlays. Overlays are not considered really an automated accessibility tool. They are a tool in the sense that they automatically try to make the website better, but overlays, they essentially just make everything worse. So if you've probably seen these little icons, the little like blue circles at the bottom of a web page. If you have a publisher or somebody that uses those, that's a big no-no. The team that we have has a lot of users of assistive technology on it, and all the years that we've been doing what we do, we've never seen a website that was made better by an overlay. They always make things worse because they don't understand context and purpose. They don't understand what a user needs to know. They just make things up because it's AI and it doesn't necessarily do a good job. And so it's also pretty redundant for what a lot of users already have. So Kathy says overlays are not allowed at ASU. Yes, thank you. But sometimes you might see maybe some publisher material or some third-party material that uses as. So if you see those, it's a big red flag, not a good thing to have. The next type of tool, manual testing tools. So I'm going to demonstrate one of those specifically called ANDI, ANDI, which stands for Accessible Name and Descriptor Indicator. It's a free tool provided by the government for 508 testing. And so it's got some nice, easy to use features. And then the third type of testing tool, if you have the ability to do this, is assistive technology, just using what the end user, your learner, will use. So if you have the ability to use a screen reader on Windows, there's a built-in screen reader called Narrator. On Mac, it's VoiceOver. You can get a free version of JAWS that will allow you to use it for a few minutes each time you start up your computer. But there's also NVDA, which is a free screen reader that you can download. And any of the assistive technology that's out there, whether it's a magnifier or whatever, if you can use any of that and just try to do some spot checking, that's great. We can skip down here. Let's see here. I want to make sure I get to it. I know we have some 10 minutes left or so. Are we okay if I just sort of skip to the demonstration part for some of these tools? Maybe a thumbs up or a yes. Great. So all the again, the information in the PowerPoint just really talks about some of these different tools and then lists them. Also in the PowerPoint are links at the end of it to all of the different tools that I'm talking about. So if you grab the PowerPoint, at the end of it, it does have links to not just the entire list of W3C tools that you could pick and choose one for yourself, but all the ones that I'm going to be talking about. So those are all available in that. So I'm going to, I think we switched it so I can share my screen. So I am going to do that. And let's see here. Switch over to Google Chrome. So hopefully you can see my screen. And what we should have is the ASU IT accessibility page. So I'm just going to show and demonstrate a couple of tools really quick. So the first one is the Wave Accessibility Checker. It's really great. It's a browser extension. You can see it in the upper right-hand corner of the web page here. It's just a W. I click on it, it automatically opens up and shows a Wave menu on the left. And you can see it really changed a lot and added a lot of little icons onto the web page. And it's basically going through and it says you've got 0 errors on this page, potentially 2 contrasts, but it gives you information about some of the different alerts that you might want to look at. And so something like this, when you see something with 0 errors on a page, that's really great. So that gives you a good indication. I know there's a inaccessible web page that you use. So I'm going to switch over to the Mr. Bean fan page real quick. If I hit Wave on that and run it, you can see it's got errors, contrast errors. It's got a lot of negative red boxes, red icons on it. Not good. So it's really easy to kind of see when things tend to be accessible or not. One of the drawbacks of some of these tools is that it just might have some false positives on there, and they can't check for every WCAG criteria. And so it's any kind of a tool like this only can look for most of them, but you get a general idea of how well a page is or how accessible it is. So if I switch back to the ASU page, I'm going to disengage the Wave tool. The other one is a tool called Ally Tublets, which is a newer kind of tool. It's the one next to it here. It's a D with a little person in it, and I'm going to turn that on. And what it does is it just has a drop-down box of these different accessibility topics, and with a switch next to it, and if I flip the switch, it will identify those elements on the screen if they're there. So for example, like landmarks, if I hit the landmarks and turn that on, it will identify all the different landmarks on there. So you would want to see things like navigation menus. You'd want to see things like your H1 or H2 tags, headers in there. So those are helpful. If I turn that off really quick and do that, close it up, I'm going to refresh the page. And then make sure that I answer my question, look, check the chats. Good. All right. So one of the last tools I want to check here and show is what's called Andy. And so I'm going to go to my tool list. And Andy is a bookmark. And when you enable it, what you just saw on the page is that it refreshed the page. And then there's a black banner across the top with the control elements for Andy in it. And what's nice is there's a menu on the left-hand side where you can select different things to look for, such as graphic images, links buttons, color contrast is one. And then when you select one, so I just chose color contrast, if I were to use the arrow keys here, or I can actually click on something with a mouse or use my tab key and just tab through the page and tab through different elements, you'll see the focus indicator box around some things. And then it'll also tell you whether or not you either manually need to check it, or if it does pass, it'll actually tell you that. So if we go through here, so on one of the first menu items, accessibility at ASU, it's black text on a white background. You can see it passes. So it's a real easy way to check some of these things. You don't necessarily need to be that sort of expert on coding to use some of these tools. And for an element, if you go through, we click through it. If you have questions about where it is too, usually when you go over an aspect of it, it'll highlight it here in this very obvious sort of pink color. And for some of them, when you choose it, it will actually point to it on the page. So very easy tool to use. So I want to make sure we've got some time for questions too. So I'm going to leave my screen here because I know some questions might be on that. But let's go ahead and open it up for questions then.
We have a question in the room. Give us just one moment.
No problem.
Hello everyone, I am Shaili and I am currently a master's student in user experience. My question is for someone who is interested in accessibility and is just starting to do user experience, what sources would you suggest?
Great question. So there are some accessibility specific courses out there if you're looking to get into accessibility testing. There's a company called DQ that has some great resources. You can also go to the International Association of Accessibility Professionals, the IAAP. Their website has some training material on that as well. So you can go there. There are certifications that you can get. So there's the Certified Professional in Accessibility Core Competencies, which is sort of a general accessibility certification that you could get. There's more advanced ones if you are into like web development and getting into web development, that you can be sort of a certified web developer with accessibility. But that's a really good question. So there's a variety of different resources that you could choose or to go to out there. The W3C and their accessibility page, they have a whole link to a variety of different resources about accessibility, and including free resources and free courses. So they offer some as well. So that would be the W3C's accessibility website. So, and Kathy looks like she put some in the chat as well, some free ASU trainings. So hopefully that answered your question. Other questions?
There are currently no more questions in the room. Any questions online? I don't see any others in the queue.
Please feel free to ask questions.
Well, Jeffrey, this is Mary in the room. I just want to say this was an extremely well done presentation. I learned a lot personally, and I felt like I knew a lot about accessibility before this started. And kudos, Kathy, for being put on the spot with the ASU accessibility website and getting 0 errors. Lovely.
Yeah, I will say then, kind of finish up. So if you do go to like our AccessiBlue website, we do put out, or I put out mostly, a lot of blogs and some documents as well. So we do have some free like ebooks and things that we put out. Ones are always developing. I have an ebook specifically on alt text, as well as some on accessibility for like social media or content developers. And I don't know if I've sent that or not. Does no, Kathy or Alejandro knows, but did I send you any of those ebooks? If not, I can.
Please do, and we'll put them up on your session page.
Okay, and then Renee asked a question, which tool is my favorite? We use a variety of different tools. I would say Andy is probably one of our favorite because you can go through things very meticulously and it's easy. One of the things Andy does is it has an Andy output, which tells you what a screen reader should be announcing and that kind of information it's conveying. So it's very easy to sort of understand that and sort of do the screen reader check at the same time. So that's just a nice feature that it has.
Yeah, that's really nice.
One more question in the room.
Yeah. Hi, Jeff. It's Alejandra. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Good. I understand. I've been fooling around with the Andy tool on my own because I became familiar with it through a course called the Trusted Tester course.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know
Yes.
about this course, and can you talk a little bit about it quickly, just to
Sure.
give us a little
Yep.
overview of what it, so it can train you it trains you how to use Andy, but maybe you can give us more detail.
Sure. The 508 Trusted Tester course is developed by the Department of Homeland Security. And it's a course that was designed for government employees to be able to learn how to assess the accessibility of documents, because it does cover like Word documents, PowerPoints, Excel, as well as how to assess a website. And you can go through it and you can, it's free course, which is nice. It's free. It takes about at least maybe 3 to 6 months to go through if you want to just tackle it all one after one. It's a very complex and diverse course. There's a lot of topics on it, and it's actually kind of tough if you go through it. But at the end, you can take the final exam and be a certified 508 trusted tester, which is a nice certification to have. Again, from the first question that was out there, but it is it does teach you how to use Andy, and it gives you a lot of other information too. There's some nice Excel spreadsheets on accessibility checking and testing. So if you're looking to get into that, it has a lot of good resources. But if you just want to know some basic how to make sure documents and PDFs are accessible, the first part of the course is great for that.
If you ever want to work for Microsoft, you got to take the Trusted Tester program. It's 80
So,
hours. Yeah.
Yeah, or if you want to work for Accessiblue, you have to take the test and pass it too.
You too, yeah. Because that's what Microsoft uses, Trusted Tester. Like the federal, the federal government uses it. Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah, it's a good course. There's a question that popped up. Is that the trusted tester process is not accessible and requires someone to assist a screen reader to use to complete the course? Can I validate that? Yes, it does help, because what you're having to do is you're having to go through a website and they give you practical examples to do. And some of those examples are not accessible because you have to be able to judge and identify the inaccessible parts. So if you are a user of assistive technology, there are some components of it that does require some assistance to do that, because obviously if you're looking to judge the correctness of alt text, that's very hard to do if you're somebody who is not able to see the alt text. And so the entire course is not inaccessible, but there are aspects of it, especially with some of the assessment components. But hopefully for Jeff B, that answered that.
Okay, well, we have about 3 minutes before our next presenter, so if you need to, take a little break, walk around, feel free, but be back at 2, because London Skiles and Adaro Allison will begin their presentation promptly at 2.
Thanks, everyone.